Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel, Eclectic Reads. So, recently I reread A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Now, this book is very important to me because this is one of the first classics that I ever read. I was in eighth grade, and my English teacher had a copy of this book on his shelves. And I had been reading Matilda by Roald Dahl, and Matilda reads a lot of classics. So I thought, I want to be really smart, so I'm going to pick up this book. And I struggled so much to understand it. I think I understood the gist of it, but there were so many pages that I didn't understand. I reread it again in high school, but it has been so many years, and I'd forgotten a lot of it. So I finally decided to pick this up and read it, and it felt like I was reading it in many ways for the first time. There were so many scenes that I don't ever remember reading, and maybe I didn't understand them when I read them the first two times. So this book is very important to me. And I say this even though I ultimately gave this book 3.5 stars. I don't think this is Dickens's best book, but I do have a lot of thoughts about it. So today I want to discuss this book. This will be a spoilery discussion. So if you have not read this book, please go and read it and then come back. I do recommend it. I think that there's a lot that is done really well. And it's just one of those books that, if you've read Dickens, you should read A Tale of Two Cities. It's one of those books. A Tale of Two Cities takes place in, two cities, London and Paris. We start our story in London when Jerry Cruncher, a very complicated character, receives a note from a banker named Mr. Lorry, and the note says, "Recalled to life." And we come to learn that the man who has been recalled to life is Dr. Manette, who is believed to have died at the Bastille. This is before the French Revolution, but actually is alive and has been living in hiding, albeit with some serious post-traumatic stress disorder, or at least it appears to be, in the wine shop of Monsieur Defarge in Paris. Mr. Lorry speaks to Lucy Manette, Dr. Manette's daughter, and she visits her father, and then there's this whole psychological element of Dr. Manette's trauma and how he overcomes it. And I will say one of the strengths of this novel is the psychological component, the way in which it deals with things like PTSD, or in the case of Sydney Carton, there's what I perceive as clinical depression. That's not usually a component in most of Dickens's novels, so I found that really, really interesting. So we have the storyline of Dr. Manette, but then we also have the storyline, of course, of Charles Darnay, who is the main protagonist of the story. Charles Darnay, also at the start of the story, is being accused of treason, and he's facing drawing and quartering, which is described in the novel very accurately, and it is very gruesome. We talk about cruel and unusual punishments, that definitely counts. He's accused of conveying classified information to France about Britain and his war in America. But thanks to Sydney Carton, Darnay is exonerated. Who is Sydney Carton? Sydney Carton is an attorney, but he basically serves as a paralegal to Mr. Stryver. Mr. Stryver, as his name suggests, is constantly striving to rise in ranks in society and to become more and more successful. Carton, on the other hand, is quite a slob. He's an alcoholic. He dresses poorly. Stryver is constantly ridiculing him. And Carton himself has a very poor self-image, which is why I say that I think he suffers from clinical depression. But he's brilliant, and it is his intervention that frees Darnay. And later on, it's Carton who confronts the spy in the story, Miss Pross's brother, and, he knows what's going on. He's the brains to Mr. Stryver. Stryver has the charisma, but he doesn't have the intelligence that Carton has. Lucy Manette is one of the weakest characters in the story. She is that stereotypical, pure, just angelic woman who cries all the time and sighs and faints. And Dickens is not very good at writing female characters, and it definitely shows in the character of Lucy. And to be honest, Charles Darnay isn't much better in his portrayal. He also isn't very compelling. But Dickens makes up for it to some extent with the character of Madame Defarge, who is Monsieur Defarge's wife, and we come to learn she has faced a lot of suffering in her own life. Her family was killed by Darnay's family, and she wants revenge. Her character is super fascinating, as is Miss Pross's character, who is Lucy's handmaiden. She's just incredibly feisty, and the fight with Madame Defarge at the end is incredible. Dickens is not very subtle with his imagery. Chapter 5 begins with an image of a wine bottle that is broken on the pavement in Paris. And of course, Monsieur Defarge, who is the leader of the Jacquerie, the revolutionary secret society, looks on. And Dickens belabors the point. It is so obvious. But if I were a high school English teacher, I would assign an essay about the wine imagery in chapter 5. It's great for close textual analysis. But yeah, Dickens is not subtle with his imagery at all. I also appreciated how Dickens allows us to sympathize with both sides of the revolution. Of course, we sympathize to a certain extent with Charles Darnay. He's innocent. Sure, his family, his uncle, is a monster, was a monster. But, killing him because of his family, that's not the way to go. But also, we do sympathize with Madame Defarge. When you read about what happened to her sister and brother and brother-in-law, I feel for her. And I actually was really surprised that Dickens included rape in his novel. Madame Defarge's sister was raped by Darnay's uncle. So, I was surprised to see the inclusion of that in the novel. And it really helps us understand why it is that this revolution happened in the first place. There's also a really interesting description of mob violence. We see how the mob thinks and how violence escalates when it comes to a mob. And of course, the historical component. There is a dance called La Carmagnole, which was an actual dance during the Revolution, and a song that apparently French people of a certain age learned when they were children as a kind of nursery rhyme, which is odd because the song is all about how the cannons are able to defeat everybody and kill the king and queen. There's a lot of there's a lot of research that went into this novel. So when it comes to the history, it's done really well. When it comes to certain characters like Madame Defarge and Miss Pross and maybe even Jerry Cruncher, that's done really well. There's some great humor. But Lucy Manette is a very weak character. Charles Darnay, not really written as well as he could have been written. I didn't really care too much about his story. And then there's Sydney Carton. In the beginning of the story, Carton is fascinating because of his mental illness, because of his substance abuse, because he's somebody that no one believes in except Lucy Manette. I think that's the one strength she has. She believes in him when other people don't. But then at the end of the story, it's like we have a completely different man. And I just didn't believe in that change. I'm reading the last quarter of the story when Sydney Carton confronts Miss Pross's brother, the spy. And I just don't believe it's the same man. He is so composed. He is so deliberate in the way that he speaks. He is not the drunk that we encounter in the beginning of the story. And I never understand how he changed character. Like, what happened that allowed him to grow? And I just don't believe that his love for Lucy Manette would be enough. I really wish that we had had a better development, that we could have seen that transformation. Maybe more focus on Carton, not just Carton at the beginning of the story and then suddenly he reappears. I think that would have been more convincing, so that at the end, I could really believe that this is a true sacrifice. I know why Dickens had to present him as composed, because he doesn't want it to appear that Carton is suicidal. But I just didn't believe in that character transformation. What I did believe in was the transformation of Dr. Manette. I could understand how during the Revolution, the fact that he has a history of having been in the Bastille affords him a privilege that he can use to try to save Charles Darnay. Like, that can give him courage and he can move on from the trauma of his time at the Bastille. Like, I could understand that, but I couldn't really understand Carton suddenly growing and just being this incredibly put together man, just calm and collected. Like, I just couldn't believe that transformation. So ultimately, I gave this book 3.5 stars. I don't recommend getting this edition. This is the Bantam Classics edition because the back basically spoils the entire story. So I found this edition annoying. I mean, I feel uncomfortable even donating it because if somebody were to pick up the book and look at the back, they would just know the whole story. I mean, it basically says here, Sydney Carton joins that exalted group of Dickensian characters who have earned a permanent place in the popular literary imagination. His dramatic story is the heart-stirring tale of a heroic soul in an age gone mad. So we know that the hero is Sydney Carton, which it's like, okay, why am I even reading this book? Maybe to figure out how he's a hero. So yeah, this was not the best Dickens novel. I'm glad that I read it. I think that there was a lot that I liked. I really want to reread Oliver Twist. That's also another book that I read many, many years ago and haven't read since. And I'm interested in reading again, despite, of course, the anti-Semitism that's in that book. I want to see what I think. My favorite Dickens novel to date is Hard Times. I've read that book many times, and it really does hold up. And I think that the characterization of the women in that book is better than in this one. Still, love Madame Defarge. I think that there have been some adaptations of the story, so maybe I want to watch one of those. Let me know your thoughts about A Tale of Two Cities, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.